The bell above the shop door jingled, but it wasn't a customer. My mother's scream tore through the air, sharp and raw, as she clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands. I stood frozen behind the counter of her antique shop, the timeless trove, watching her world, our world, crumble under the weight of those cruel, printed words. Clara, how could this happen? Mom's voice broke, her graying hair falling loose from its bun, as she sank into a velvet-upholstered chair, one of the shop's prized pieces. At 40, I'd seen her weather storms. My father's death, financial struggles, but this was different. This was betrayal, served cold by the man she'd trusted with her heart. My stepfather, Richard. The timeless trove wasn't just a store. It was Mom's sanctuary. After Dad passed when I was a teenager, she poured her grief into this place, curating every chipped teacup and dusty gramophone with love. Each item held a story, a fragment of someone's life, and Mom believed in preserving them. The shop, tucked in a quaint corner of our small town, was her legacy, until Richard decided it was an obstacle. He'd always hated it. A cluttered junkyard, he'd sneer, his polished shoes clicking impatiently on the shop's creaky oak floors. At 50, Richard was all charm on the surface, tall, silver-haired, with a smile that disarmed everyone but me. I saw the greed in his eyes, the way he sized up Mom's treasures like they were pawns in his game. He wanted her to sell the shop, to fund his big plans for a real estate empire. Mom refused, so he got creative. The eviction notice came from a company called Pinnacle Properties. It claimed Mom had missed rent payments for months. A lie so blatant it made my blood boil. She owned the building outright. Dad's life insurance had paid off the mortgage years ago. But Richard, with his connections and cunning, had orchestrated this. He'd been cozying up to Pinnacle's CEO, a slick developer named Victor Crane, at country club dinners. I'd overheard their late-night calls, Richard's voice low and conspiratorial, promising mutual benefits. "Clara, we'll fight this," I said, kneeling beside her, my hands steadying hers. My voice sounded braver than I felt. At 30, I was no stranger to battles. I'd built a career as a freelance investigator, digging into fraud and corruption for clients who needed truth unearthed. But this was personal. Richard wasn't just threatening Mom's livelihood. He was dismantling her heart. I spent that night poring over documents in the shop's back room, surrounded by the faint scent of polished wood and old books. The eviction notice was riddled with inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that looked forged. Richard's name wasn't on it, but his fingerprints were everywhere. I found an email on Mom's computer, sent from an anonymous account, warning her to sell before it's too late. It was dated weeks before the notice arrived. By morning, I had a plan. I called Mom's old friend, Lila, a lawyer who'd helped us after Dad's death. She was skeptical but agreed to dig into Pinnacle Properties. "If Richard's involved, we'll find the thread," she said, her voice crackling with determination over the phone. I also reached out to an old college contact, Ethan, who worked in real estate and had a knack for sniffing out shady deals. "Give me a day," he texted back. "I'll see what Pinnacle's hiding." The shop opened as usual, though the air felt heavy. Customers browsed, unaware of the storm brewing. Mom forced a smile, dusting a porcelain figurine with shaking hands. I watched her, my chest tight. She'd given me everything: strength, love, a belief in second chances. I wouldn't let Richard steal that from her. That afternoon, Ethan called. "Pinnacle's a front," he said. "Shell company tied to a bigger player." I'm still digging, but Richard's name popped up in a related LLC. "He's deeper in this than you think." My pulse raced. Richard wasn't just a bystander. He was orchestrating the whole thing. But why? The shop's lot was valuable, sure, but his motives felt personal, like a vendetta against Mom's independence. I confronted him that evening at the house. He was in his study, sipping whiskey, his laptop glowing with spreadsheets. "Clara," he said, barely looking up, Don't meddle in things you don't understand. Like you meddling with Mom's shop? I shot back, tossing the eviction notice on his desk. His eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly, leaning back with a smirk. Your mother's stubborn. That shop's a money pit. I'm doing her a favor. A favor. I laughed, bitter. You faked her debt, Richard. You're trying to force her out. He stood, towering over me, his charm replaced by something colder. Careful, Clara. You're out of your depth. I wasn't. Not anymore. That night, I found a hidden file on his laptop. A draft contract between Pinnacle and a developer, promising to turn the shop's lot into condos. Richard stood to gain a massive payout. But there was something else. A name I didn't expect. The property's title wasn't in Mom's name anymore. It was in mine. I stared at the document on Richard's laptop, my name glaring back at me in black and white. Clara Elizabeth Monroe, sole owner of 214 Maple Street, the Timeless Troves address. My heart pounded. Mom had never told me she'd transferred the deed. When? Why? The date on the transfer was 3 years ago, right after I'd helped her navigate a tax issue with the shop. She'd hugged me then, saying, "This place is yours too, Clara." I thought it was sentimental, not literal. Richard didn't know. That was clear from the smug confidence in his scheme. He thought Mom still owned the property, making it easier to manipulate her with forged documents and fake debts. But this changed everything. If I owned the shop, his entire plan was built on a lie, one I could use to unravel him. I didn't tell Mom yet. She was already fragile, and I needed answers first. The next morning, I met Lila at a coffee shop 2 towns over, away from Richard's prying eyes. She slid a manila folder across the table, her expression grim. "Pinnacle's a maze of shell companies," she said. "Richard's tied to at least 3, funneling money through offshore accounts. But the real kicker? The eviction notice cites a lease agreement that doesn't exist." I flipped through her notes, my investigator's instincts kicking in. The notice referenced a lease between Mom and Pinnacle, dated 6 months ago. But Mom hadn't signed anything, her meticulous records proved it. Richard must have forged her signature, banking on her trust in him to keep her from double-checking. It was bold even for him. "What about the deed transfer?" I asked, lowering my voice. Lila's eyes widened when I explained. She pulled out her tablet, accessing county records. Sure enough, the deed was in my name, filed legally with my signature. I vaguely remembered signing something for Mom back then, buried in a stack of tax forms. She'd slipped it in, protecting her legacy without burdening me. "This is your leverage," Lila said. "Richard's whole scheme hinges on Mom being the owner. If he's caught forging documents against you, it's fraud. Criminal charges, not just a civil dispute." I nodded, my mind racing. Exposing Richard wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the weight of his betrayal, the way Mom did. But I needed proof, something undeniable. Ethan texted me later that day. "Found a lead. Pinnacle CEO, Victor Crane, is meeting Richard tonight at the Oak Room. 8 p.m. Be there." The Oak Room was a ritzy bar downtown, all leather booths and dim lighting. I slipped in, dressed in black to blend with the evening crowd, and took a seat in a corner booth. Richard and Victor were already there, their heads bent close over martinis. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. I'd brought a directional mic, a trick from my investigative work. Earbuds in, I caught fragments of their conversation. "The lot's prime," Victor was saying. "We'll flip it for millions once she's out." "She's stubborn," Richard replied, his voice smooth. "But the notice will break her. She'll sell." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. They were talking about Mom like she was a pawn, not a person. Victor mentioned a silent partner who'd bankrolled Pinnacle, someone Richard answered to. That was new. I needed to know who. I snapped a photo of them with my phone, careful to stay in the shadows. As I left, my heart was a drumbeat of rage and resolve. Richard thought he'd won, but he didn't know I held the deed, or that I was building a case to bury him. Back at the shop, Mom was closing up, her movements slow, like she was carrying an invisible weight. I wanted to tell her everything, to ease her pain, but I held back. If I moved too soon, Richard could cover his tracks. Instead, I helped her lock up, my hand lingering on the doorframe of the shop that was somehow mine. The next day, I dug deeper. Ethan sent me a list of Pinnacle's transactions, flagged for suspicious activity. One stood out, a $50,000 transfer to an account linked to Richard's LLC, labeled consulting fees. It was a bribe, plain and simple. I cross-referenced it with public records and found Victor's name on a city planning board, pushing for rezoning in our area. The pieces were falling into place. Richard was selling out Mom's shop to line his pockets, using Pinnacle as a front. But the silent partner nagged at me. Who was pulling the strings? I needed more time, and a way to confront Richard without tipping him off. That's when Lila called with a bombshell. Clara, the deed transfer wasn't just a gift. Your mom added a clause. If the shop's ever sold, the proceeds go to a trust. For you. Mom's trust clause hit me like a freight train. She'd planned for every contingency, ensuring that even if the shop was sold, Richard couldn't touch the money. It was her final act of defiance, a shield against his greed. But it also meant he'd been plotting against me, not just her, without even knowing it. The irony burned. I kept the discovery from Mom, not wanting to overwhelm her. She was already fraying, her eyes red from sleepless nights, her hands unsteady as she polished a brass candelabra. Clara, what if we lose this? She whispered, gesturing at the shop's shelves, each one a mosaic of memories. I hugged her, promising we'd fight. Inside, I was plotting more than a defense. I was planning Richard's downfall. Lila and I met again, this time at her office, a cramped space filled with legal books and coffee mugs. She'd pulled more records on Pinnacle properties. They're over-leveraged, she said, tapping a spreadsheet. Borrowed millions to buy up small businesses, then flipped the lots for profit. Your shop's just one piece of their puzzle. She showed me a map of our town, red pins marking Pinnacle's acquisitions. The timeless trove was in the heart of their target zone, a historic district ripe for condos. But here's the kicker, Lila continued. Pinnacle's silent partner? It's Margaret Voss. My stomach dropped. Margaret was Richard's ex-wife, a real estate mogul who'd left him years ago after catching him embezzling from her company. She was ruthless, wealthy, and, apparently, still bitter. Richard must have promised her a cut of the shop's sale to fund his own schemes, using her money to bankroll Pinnacle. This was bigger than I'd thought. Margaret's involvement explained the scale of the operation, and why Richard was so confident. But it also gave me an opening. If I could prove Margaret was knowingly funding fraud, I could take them both down. I spent the next 2 days tailing Richard, discreetly. He met Victor again, this time at a construction site on the edge of town. I parked a block away, using binoculars to watch them gesture at blueprints. Victor handed Richard an envelope, cash probably. I snapped photos, my camera's shutter clicking like a metronome. Every image was another nail in Richard's coffin. Ethan came through again, hacking into a public database of Pinnacle's filings. He found a paper trail linking Margaret's company to the shell accounts funding Pinnacle. She's careful, he warned. Nothing directly ties her to the eviction notice. You'll need something concrete, like a recorded admission. That night, I devised a plan. Richard was hosting a charity gala at the country club, a perfect cover for his schmoozing with Victor and, likely, Margaret. I'd go, not as Clara the investigator, but as Clara the stepdaughter, playing naive to get close. I borrowed a dress from Lila, emerald green, elegant but understated, and slipped into the gala, my heart pounding. The room sparkled with chandeliers and champagne flutes. Richard was in his element, shaking hands, his laugh booming. I spotted Margaret across the room, a statuesque woman in her late 50s, her silver hair pinned up, her eyes sharp as knives. Victor was at her side, whispering something that made her nod. I edged closer, pretending to admire a floral arrangement, my mic hidden in my clutch. "Richard's delivering," Victor said, his voice low. "The shop's as good as ours. She'll crack soon." Margaret's lips curled. "She'd better. I want that lot, Victor. Richard owes me, and I always collect." My blood ran cold. They were talking about Mom, about her shop like it was a trophy to be won. I recorded every word, my hands steady despite the rage bubbling inside me. But I needed more, something to tie Richard directly to the fraud. I approached him, pasting on a smile. "Richard, great event," I said, my voice light. "Mom would love this." His eyes narrowed, but he kept his charm intact. "Clara, didn't expect you here. Enjoying yourself?" "Oh, absolutely," I lied. "Heard you're working with Pinnacle. Big plans for the shop's lot." His smile faltered, just for a second. "Business talk's boring, Clara. Let's not spoil the evening." I pressed, casual but pointed. "Just curious. Mom's pretty attached to that place. Shame if something happened to it." He excused himself abruptly, his jaw tight. I'd rattled him. Good. But as I turned to leave, Margaret caught my eye, her gaze piercing. She knew who I was, and she wasn't pleased. Margaret's stare lingered as I slipped out of the gala, the weight of her suspicion pressing on me. She wasn't just a silent partner. She was a predator, and I just stepped into her line of sight. But I had her voice on tape, admitting her stake in the shop's destruction. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was a start. I needed to move fast. Richard was rattled, and rattled men make mistakes. Back at my apartment, I uploaded the recording to a secure drive, alongside the photos and Ethan's documents. The puzzle was coming together, but it was missing a centerpiece. Proof that Richard forged the eviction notice. I called Lila at dawn, my voice hoarse from sleeplessness. "We need to search Richard's office at home," I said. "He's hiding something. Maybe the original lease he faked." Lila hesitated. "That's breaking and entering, Clara. If we're caught, we won't be." I cut in. "He's at a golf game this morning. Mom's at the shop. It's our chance." She agreed reluctantly, and we met at the house an hour later. Mom's Victorian, once warm with laughter, felt cold under Richard's influence, his sleek furniture clashing with her vintage charm. His office was locked, but I'd learned lockpicking in my early investigative days. The door clicked open, revealing a mahogany desk littered with papers. We worked fast. Lila scanned bank statements while I rifled through drawers. Buried under a stack of contracts, I found it. A draft of the fake lease, complete with Mom's forged signature. The date matched the eviction notice, and Richard's initials were scrawled in the margin. My hands shook as I photographed it, the evidence burning a hole in my chest. "Clara, look at this," Lila whispered, holding up a bank transfer receipt. It showed $100,000 from Margaret's company to Richard's LLC, labeled Consulting Services for 214 Maple. It was the smoking gun, proof they were colluding to steal the shop. We left before Richard returned, my mind buzzing with next steps. Confronting him now would be satisfying but reckless. He'd deny everything, and Margaret's lawyers would bury us. Instead, I called Ethan. "Can you get me into Pinnacle's office? I need their internal records." Ethan groaned. "You're gonna get me fired, Clara." But he agreed, pulling strings to get me a temp badge as a consultant. That afternoon, I walked into Pinnacle's sleek downtown office, my heart pounding. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I slipped into a records room, guided by Ethan's directions. I found a file labeled Maple Street Acquisition and snapped photos of every page, emails between Richard and Victor, a timeline for the shop's demolition, even a mock-up of the condos they planned to build. One email stopped me cold. It was from Margaret to Richard, dated a month ago. "If you can't deliver the lot, you'll regret it. I don't forgive debts." It wasn't just business for her, it was revenge. Richard had crossed her once, and she was using him to get even with Mom's shop as collateral. I left Pinnacle's office with enough evidence to sink them all, but I needed to protect Mom first. That night, I finally told her the truth. About the deed, Richard's scheme, everything. She sat on the shop's counter, surrounded by her treasures, her face pale but resolute. "I trusted him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could I be so blind?" "You loved him," I said, squeezing her hand. "That's not weakness, it's strength." She nodded, tears falling, but there was fire in her eyes. "What do we do now?" "We fight," I said, "and we win." The next day I set a trap. I texted Richard from Mom's phone, asking him to meet her at the shop to discuss selling. He arrived at dusk, his suit pristine, his smile smug. Mom stood behind the counter, her hands steady now, while I waited in the back room, recording. "Ellen, you're finally seeing reason," Richard said, leaning against a display case. "Sell now and we'll all profit." Mom played her part perfectly. "What's in it for you, Richard? Why push so hard?" He laughed cold and sharp. "Because it's business, Ellen. Pinnacle's offering millions. You're sitting on a gold mine. And the eviction notice?" She pressed, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "Was that business too?" His silence was damning. I stepped out, holding the forged lease. "It's over, Richard. I own the shop, and I've got everything. Your emails, your payoffs, your lies." His face drained of color, his eyes darting to the door. He was trapped, and he knew it. Richard's smug facade shattered, his eyes wide with panic as he stared at the forged lease in my hand. The shop's warm glow from vintage lamps cast harsh shadows on his face, making him look older, smaller. Mom stood tall behind the counter, her heartbreak replaced by a quiet fury that made me proud. "You own it," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. "That's impossible. Ellen." Ellen protected her legacy. I cut in, stepping closer. "She put the deed in my name years ago. Your whole scheme was built on a lie." He backed toward the door, but I wasn't done. "I've got your emails with Victor, your payments from Margaret, the fake lease with your initials. This fraud, Richard. And I'm not afraid to take this to court." Mom spoke, her voice steady. "Why, Richard? I loved you. I trusted you." For a moment, guilt flickered across his face, but it vanished quickly. "You're too sentimental, Ellen," he sneered. "This shop's a relic. I was trying to secure our future." "Your future?" I snapped. "You sold us out for a payout." He lunged for the lease, but I yanked it back, my heart racing. "Don't bother," I said. "It's all backed up. Walk away now or I go to the police." Richard froze, calculating. Then he turned and stormed out, the bell jingling violently behind him. Mom exhaled, her shoulders slumping. I hugged her, feeling her tremble. "It's not over yet," I whispered, "but we're close." Lila took the evidence to a prosecutor the next morning. The forged lease, combined with the recorded gala conversation and Pinnacle's shady financials, was enough for an investigation. But Margaret Voss was the bigger threat. She had the money and connections to dodge accountability, unless I could force her hand. I reached out to a journalist friend, Sarah, who worked for the local paper. She'd been itching to expose corruption in the town's real estate boom. I sent her the documents anonymously, keeping Mom and me out of it for now. By evening, Sarah texted, "This is huge. Pinnacle's done. Story runs tomorrow." The article hit like a bomb. Local developer tied to fraudulent evictions. The headline screamed, detailing Pinnacle's shell companies and shady deals. Richard's name wasn't mentioned yet, but Victor Crane was, and the article hinted at a prominent investor pulling the strings. Margaret would know it was her. I watched Richard unravel over the next few days. He stopped coming to the shop, his calls to Mom going unanswered. She changed the locks on the house, her resolve hardening. But I knew Margaret wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, Lila got a call from a lawyer representing Pinnacle, offering to settle the eviction dispute. It was a trap to buy our silence. No deal, I told Lila. We're taking this all the way. Ethan dug deeper into Margaret's past, uncovering a history of ruthless takeovers. She'd bankrupted small businesses before, using proxies like Richard to avoid scrutiny. But she'd underestimated us. I decided to confront her directly, not as a threat, but as a warning. I found her at a real estate conference, her poise unshaken despite the article. Ms. Voss, I said, approaching her in the lobby. I'm Clara Monroe. You're trying to steal my mother's shop. Her smile was ice. I don't know what you're talking about. I have proof, I said, keeping my voice low. Your emails, your payments to Richard, your plans for the lot. Walk away, or I'll make sure everyone knows. She studied me, her eyes narrowing. You're bold, I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game. So are you? I shot back. And I'm holding the deed. She didn't flinch, but I saw the calculation in her gaze. She'd underestimated the wrong person. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Prosecutors moving on Pinnacle. Richard's been called in for questioning. Back at the shop, Mom was restocking shelves, her movements lighter. Customers trickled in, drawn by the article's buzz about the timeless trove. Clara, she said, pausing to hold a cracked teacup. I thought I'd lost this place, but you brought it back. I smiled, my throat tight. It's ours, Mom. Always will be. The shop felt alive again, its shelves gleaming under soft light, the air humming with the quiet stories of each antique. Mom's smile was back, tentative but real, as she helped a customer wrap a vintage clock. But I couldn't relax. Richard was under investigation, but Margaret was still out there, a shadow waiting to strike. The prosecutor's office moved fast. By the next morning, Richard had been formally charged with fraud and forgery, thanks to the forged lease and Ethan's financial records. Lila called with the news, her voice triumphant. He's out on bail, but he's done, Clara. The evidence is airtight. I should have felt relief, but Margaret's silence worried me. She wasn't the type to retreat. I kept digging, combing through her company's public filings. Ethan found a new lead. A subsidiary of Margaret's had applied for a permit to develop the shop's lot, even after the article broke. She was still moving forward, banking on Richard taking the fall. I decided to turn up the heat. Sarah's article had stirred public interest, and the shop was getting support from locals who'd read about the scandal. I organized a community event at the Timeless Trove, a Save Our History sale, with proceeds going to a local preservation fund. Mom was hesitant, worried about drawing attention, but I convinced her. Let's show them what this place means, I said. The event was a hit. Neighbors filled the shop, swapping stories about their own heirlooms, buying trinkets, and signing a petition to protect the historic district. A reporter from Sarah's paper covered it, snapping photos of Mom laughing with customers. For the first time in weeks, she looked like herself again, vibrant, purposeful. But Margaret wasn't done. That evening, a sleek black car parked across the street. I recognized her driver from the gala. She didn't come in, but her presence was a message. She was watching. I texted Lila, who was already preparing a civil suit against Pinnacle and Margaret personally. We'll hit her where it hurts, her wallet, Lila said. The next day, I got a call from an unexpected ally, Victor Crane. He sounded shaken. Clara, I want out, he said. Margaret's throwing me under the bus. I'll testify if you can protect me. I met him at a diner far from prying eyes. Victor looked haggard, his suit rumpled, his hands fidgeting with a coffee mug. Margaret used me, he admitted. She funded Pinnacle, but Richard was her puppet. She wanted your shop's lot to settle an old score with him. What score? I asked, leaning forward. Richard stole from her years ago, Victor said. Embezzled millions. She never forgave him. When he came to her with this deal, she saw a chance to ruin him, and your mom's shop was just collateral. I recorded every word, my mind racing. Victor's testimony could tie Margaret directly to the fraud, making her liable. Why come to me now? I asked. Because I'm next, he said, his voice low. She's cutting ties, pinning it all on me and Richard. I have emails, Clara. Proof she knew about the forged lease. He sent me the files that night, incriminating messages where Margaret instructed Richard to handle the eviction, knowing it was illegal. It was the final piece I needed. I forwarded everything to Lila and the prosecutor, my hands trembling with adrenaline. The shop was quiet the next morning, but the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Mom was rearranging a display of vintage jewelry when I told her about Victor. It's almost over, I said. Margaret's going down with Richard. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I just want this place to be safe, Clara. For you. For us. It will be, I promised. But as I said it, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off, or you'll regret it. I knew it was Margaret. She was cornered, and cornered predators were dangerous. The threat from Margaret's text lingered like smoke, but I wasn't backing down. The timeless trove was more than a shop. It was Mom's heart, my inheritance, and a symbol of everything we'd fought for. I showed the text to Lila, who filed it as evidence of intimidation. She's desperate, Lila said. That's good. Desperate people slip up. The prosecutor moved swiftly. With Victor's testimony and Margaret's emails, they expanded the investigation to include her. The local paper ran a follow-up story, naming Margaret explicitly as Pinnacle's backer. Public outrage grew, and the city council paused all of Pinnacle's permits, including the one for Mom's lot. The community rally had worked. People were watching now, and Margaret's influence was crumbling. Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. He called Mom, begging for forgiveness, claiming he'd been misled by Margaret. She hung up, her hand steady. He made his choice, she said, her voice firm. She was done with him, and so was I. But Margaret wasn't finished. She sent a lawyer to the shop with a new offer. $500,000 to drop the case and sell the lot. Mom laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in months. Tell Ms. Voss, she said, that this shop isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. I was proud of her, but I knew Margaret wouldn't stop. I set up a final play, coordinating with Sarah and the prosecutor. We leaked a rumor to a local blog that Pinnacle's records were being audited by the IRS. It was a bluff, but it spooked Margaret. She called a meeting with Victor and her lawyers, which Ethan tipped me off about. I slipped into the building, posing as a courier, and planted a recorder in the conference room. The tape was gold. Margaret admitted to everything, funding the forged lease, pressuring Richard, even planning to frame Victor if it went south. I wanted that lot, she hissed on the recording, and I wanted Richard to suffer. It was enough to seal her fate. The next day, the prosecutor filed charges against her for conspiracy and fraud. She was arrested at her penthouse, her face stone-cold as cameras flashed. Richard pleaded guilty to lesser charges, desperate to avoid a longer sentence. He'd lost everything: his reputation, his schemes, his marriage to Mom. The timeless trove thrived. The community rally had put it on the map, and customers came from miles away, drawn by the story of Mom's resilience. She hired a new manager to help, giving her time to heal. I took a step back, my investigator's work done, but I visited often, helping her dust shelves or rearrange displays. One evening, as we closed up, Mom handed me a small, tarnished key, a relic from the shop's first day. "This was your father's," she said, her voice soft. "He'd be proud of you, Clara. You saved this place." I held the key, my throat tight. "We saved it, Mom. Together." The shop's bell jingled as a late customer slipped in, and Mom smiled, ready to share another story from her treasures. Outside, the town buzzed with life, but inside the timeless trove, time stood still, preserved by love and a fight we'd won. Margaret and Richard were gone, their schemes reduced to ashes. The shop, our shop, was ours forever.